We're live. Hello, friends. Welcome to Be Wise. My name is Ranjit Anipu. I'm a co-founder of Be Wise, your knowledge partner for the resource revolution. Welcome to Pioneers and Changemakers. This new initiative is a weekly series of 30-minute interviews with some of the best minds in circular economy, sanitation, wastes, and resources management. There are a lot of problems in our world, and but not enough leaders. So, in this program, in addition to learning what people are doing worldwide, you'll also learn how they implement solutions, how they solve problems, and choose between alternatives, and why they began their journeys. Um, this program builds on our annual program called the Global Dialogue on Waste and our knowledge partnerships with the Asian Development Bank, the International Solid Waste Association, and Waste Aid UK. These interviews are not just about listening to leaders, but it is about learning to be a leader and becoming one. So it is for the pioneers and change makers in you. If you have any questions, use the live chat box below the video and send them to us. If you learned anything from this interview, please share it with your colleagues and friends so that they can also get the opportunity to learn. And if you'd like to support us and keep us going, you can use the donate button on the website or go to wastewise.be/donate and make a one-time or monthly contribution. With that, let's welcome my friend and well-known journalist Cole Rosengren from Waste Dive. Cole, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. First off, thank you for the invitation. Always nice to be involved with what you're doing here on Be Wastewise. I am a staff reporter for Waste Dive. We're an online trade publication, part of the Industry Dive family, covering 13 different industries. Based in Somerville, Massachusetts, but I work remotely and travel often to conferences throughout the East Coast and around the country. If anyone's going to be at Waste Expo in Las Vegas next month, come say hi. And I have been on the trash beat for 3 to 4 years now, depending on how you count it, starting freelance as a community reporter in New York City, where I found these issues interesting. And now I've been with Waste Dive for coming up on 2 years.
Right. So could you tell us how you got into the sector? I know I've heard the story, but.
Sure. Yeah, so I've always, before I worked as a reporter, made my money in the service industry, working in restaurants and catering. I'd done that starting in high school and through college. And then when I moved to New York, and you deal with a lot of food waste at restaurants. Don't always recognize it because you're moving quickly. But once I moved into large-scale catering in New York, it became quite apparent. I quickly became part of the sanitation crew at the catering company. And we were, first in, last out at any large event, setting things up and dealing with all the trash at the end of the day. And this was before New York had standardized its commercial recycling rules. So it was often confusing. We'd be at different locations with different things we could recycle. Maybe we were saving the food, maybe we weren't. And on any event, whether it was 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people, there's a lot of stuff left over at the end, especially a lot of food. And so when you're the one physically carrying it, maybe through a field in the middle of the night or up and down some stairs or in a service elevator, the food waste is leaking out of the bag and you're trying to get it up into the dumpster, you wonder, there must be a better way. Mm. And so I got interested, started finding any books I could on, waste issues in New York and around the world. And at the same time, I also went back to school, journalism school, City University of New York, to get my master's degree. And kind of made this my beat at the time. We focused on community reporting. I chose the South Bronx as my neighborhood because there's a lot of waste infrastructure there and a lot of environmental justice issues. And that was sort of a springboard to what has become now the national trash beat. It's a lot to cover. It's very fun.
Yeah. So what kind of issues did you start covering? What were the dynamics of those issues?
Sure. So I think I believe it's my first official story on this was about a city council bill around waste transfer station siting in New York. Very controversial, still hasn't passed. Actually, this has been going on for many years. And I just started walking around and knocking on doors at the transfer stations in Hunts Point, asking the people who operated them what they thought of this, how it would affect their business. Most of them didn't want to talk to me, but a few did. And also got to know the environmental justice advocates involved in this. Truck traffic is a big concern when you site a lot of these facilities in neighborhoods that either used to be industrial or are still industrial, but are close to a lot of residential buildings. Got to start going to city council sanitation committee hearings, getting to know folks who worked at the Department of Sanitation, worked in local government, and then from there, had the good timing that New York City announced a zero waste goal and Earth Day 2015, right as I was really just starting to get to know this stuff. And so that became a great launching pad to look at how the city operated and how it was going to achieve this and what other cities were doing as a model.
Great. Talking about these issues, during our test run, we spoke about data standardization by the EPA. I know they've just started working on this. So could you talk about that? I mean, I know you're covering this issue now.
Yeah. So as anyone knows who's involved in this space, it can be hard to get good data in the first place. Various local governments and the industry is not always transparent about what's being done. And this is really because different states have different reporting requirements in terms of having to report how much you send to a landfill or to a waste energy facility. In terms of calculating recycling rates or diversion rates, everyone does it differently. So it's very hard to compare state to state, even city to city sometimes. It's tempting to do so, and we often see these articles, oh, hey, San Francisco's the leader, X city is only at this number, we're so far behind. And it's true, the West Coast is doing a lot of innovative work, but it's hard to make these comparisons. And so I would say 8+ years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, the EPA regional folks down in Southeast started the state measurement program, getting together, saying, hey, can we try and get on the same page with this? Using voluntary reporting, using a free platform. And that has grown. There's now almost 40 states, and DC have participated in this over the years. And just recently in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the Measurement Matters Summit was held, the first of its kind, to really get everyone together and say, how can we advance this further? And try to start using the same language. Because it's hard. In the US, we have a very locally driven regulatory system for solid waste. The EPA is involved, and they regulate how to run a landfill and waste emissions and such, but they don't really have a lot of authority over how these things are measured. And so that's a big problem right now, is figuring that out and getting that data at all. Like I said, people don't always want to share.
Right. And did you find this topic yourself? I mean, were you looking for something like this, or did your boss ask you to cover this?
That's a good question. Well, sure. As a reporter or a researcher, anyone in this field, we're always trying to just get good information and vet that information and know if we can trust it and understand how it was sourced and how it was developed. And so that's been an ongoing challenge. When I go to write a story, if it's about a city or an area that I'm not familiar with, one of the first things I do is say, oh, can I find their latest annual report, or can I see some of their metrics? Can't always find those. And so, yeah, it was on my mind. And then I heard about this from actually the Southeast Recycling Development Council. They're a trade group down there, and they have been instrumental in this Measurement Matters summit and program. And so they invited me down to the conference, and that's how I knew about that.
Great. And so working as a journalist, you talk to a lot of people, and you hear about what's happening and what's going to happen, and what people envision for the future a lot, right? I mean, I mean, talking to so many people, it might just feel like something's always going to happen, like change is coming. Or maybe talking to so many people and then watching on the ground, you might feel like it's not happening as fast as it should. Could you just talk to us about the pace of change in the industry in US, and not just about the pace of change overall, but also maybe if there are any differences, in different areas, different scales? Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. You're right. It is hard to get a good barometer on how fast things are moving and what is possible when you talk to so many different folks. I'm fortunate to have a wide range of sources from the, what some would consider the most strident of the environmental community on down to the longtime folks in the industry and folks in government. And they don't always talk. They don't always see eye to eye, even though they really do agree on a lot of things. But same as with politics or anything else, it can be hard to get people to have common conversations. And in that, yeah, you'll hear from some people, especially zero waste goals come to mind. This is seen as something that is a movement and really needs to happen and is very exciting. But then I'll talk to some skeptics and they say, well, we're never going to get there. And so we're, wasting our time by setting these lofty approaches. But maybe there's some incremental change that can happen, and maybe that's okay. And in terms of the pace of it, I would say regulations do drive that. As I mentioned, the EPA is not the body that is doing that for the most part, but we have seen a lot of states do this, particularly around organic waste. We have 6 states now with some form of ban or state policy on having to divert organic material from landfills or waste energy facilities, and that definitely drives a lot of change, a lot of investment. And you'll see that at the local level too. Some city decides they want to start diverting X thing or move away from certain type of technology to another. And so that is what drives that change. The industry, I would say they are very adaptable. They would tell you they can deal with a carbon tax in California, or they can deal with a majority landfill model in some more rural part of the country. And so yet at the same time, they're often the ones who kind of weigh in on the feasibility of these changes. With the exception of very large cities, a lot of local governments don't really have full-time folks dedicated to this. So if you're a small town or a small county and you're faced with this expensive decision, you're probably going to defer to the industry because they're the ones who know how this works. At the same time, they also have their own interests to kind of drive things in their direction. And so that's what makes it complicated.
Right. Speaking about full-time folks, could you, I know this is an issue which is, close to your heart, and you've been covering it and want to cover it in the future. Could you talk about low-wage workers and what's going on with them?
Sure. Yeah, so we hear a lot right now about labor shortages in general. The unemployment rate nationally is pretty low, and so hiring anyone in anything that even remotely close to the trades is difficult. There's an aging workforce. Trucking comes to mind. There's a big truck driver shortage. A lot of people are very concerned that will just get worse, and that relates to driving a collection vehicle or maybe driving the long haul truck to the landfill. And so that gets a lot of attention. What we don't hear about as much is hiring for working at, say, recycling facilities, where they do need a lot of people. Their technology is evolving quickly, but it is still, for the most part, relies on a lot of human labor, a lot of quality control, a lot of picking stuff off the lines. And so that has been interesting to me to say, okay, we're hearing about the truck driver shortage. Why is there a MRF shortage? And there is. Just doesn't get talked about as much because those jobs are viewed as lower skill and hence often get lower pay. And that means it's easier to turn people over. You're more apt to see temporary labor involved. It's what some would call a permatemp situation. They work there for months, sometimes years, and they are never full-time employees. And so this is an area that's interesting in part because injury rates are still high at MRFs as they are in other parts of the sector. And so I've been asking around about that. What is your starting pay for a MRF sorter? What is your turnover rate? Do you view this as a good job, and why doesn't it merit more pay? I had the chance to ask Brent Bell. He's the head of waste management.
What kind of responses are you getting to those?
Well, so yeah, no one really wants to talk about it for the most part. Even folks who are running otherwise very quality operations and have big aspirations about diversion, zero waste. It's a sensitive subject. And so, yeah, from Waste Management, they run the largest recycling operation in North America. I interviewed him earlier this month at a conference in Denver, and he told me, yes, they do have a high turnover rate, and they don't view it as the most appealing job, and they get that. And they think automation might be the answer to that. They're experimenting with new technologies now to theoretically phase out the need for as much human labor in sorting. And this is an area where people don't seem to mind as much. We're certainly very nervous about automated driving and other places that could, get rid of jobs. But I haven't heard anyone say, "Oh, let's make sure to keep these MRF jobs." That's so far, and I would be happy to hear that perspective if it's out there. But people seem okay with that one.
Right. Very interesting. And I think we can talk about automation for a bit. But before that, could you talk about the impact of maybe the China recycling restrictions on these low-wage workers?
Mm-hmm.
I know we'll be talking about the China restrictions for quite a bit, for the months and years to come. But what's its role in the low wage workers?
It's a very interesting question, and one we don't fully have the answer to. So far, what we know is that to meet new quality standards that have been set by China and have become kind of the new normal in the industry, a lot of facilities have slowed down the processing speeds on their lines, sometimes as much as half. And so, if you think about your worker standing over the conveyor belt, probably makes your life a little better if things aren't moving quite so fast. They've also staffed up in a lot of cases, adding more labor, often temporary labor, to assist in quality control. And so my curiosity is to see what does that do to injury rates. Some folks think it might actually reduce them. We won't know that for a while because the National Bureau of Labor Statistics data runs about a year behind. And so it takes some time to bear that out. But so far, that is the main impact, staffing up and maybe slower working conditions for these folks.
That's interesting. When you say that the labor data will be 1 year, it's generally 1 year later. It just reminded me of how scientists try to control rovers on faraway planets. The rover does something, and then you get the data after a few days, and then you do the next thing. So it's kind of like that. But it was just a funny thought. But so since we were talking about rovers, I think we can also talk about automation now. So what's going on there?
Sure. Right now, it's mainly at the MRFs where we're seeing this. There's optical sorters and various early steps for automation that are eliminating what would have been a human sorting position. What's most intriguing is if and when we'll ever see it on the streets. Volvo has been testing automated waste collection over in Sweden, and there's talk of how that could ever come over here. We saw what happened recently. The Uber-related fatality with self-driving cars kind of freaked some people out, and I think it's gonna be a while until we see an automated collection truck on the streets here. But what a lot of people think we could see much sooner is automated vehicles on closed sites. Landfills have come up as a very probably good example of this. You could drive a compactor, or it doesn't need to be a human involved in that. And there's no pedestrians, there's no cyclists, there's no other surprises there for the most part. And so companies like Waste Management and others have been looking at this. But I will say the others are also pursuing the automated collection option. Rubicon Global has filed patents for this. They've been fairly quiet about that so far, but folks are looking at it. Predicting a timeline, I have no idea, but it's certainly going to happen in our lifetimes, I think.
Right, great. And I've also, at the conference yesterday, the Organic Summit, I've heard about automated windrow composting turners. So yeah, I think it is an interesting time. A lot of change happening at this point. All right, so I know Waste Dive. So we have only 12 more minutes. So let me just remind everyone, friends. So friends, you're watching Cole Rosengren from Waste Dive. If you have any questions, use the chat box below and send the questions to him so that I can ask him and then he can respond to them. Next week we'd not have an interview, but the week after that we are interviewing Sarah Curry-Halpern from Think Zero LLC, and she's also the chair of Manhattan Swab. So do join in. And with that, Cole, could you talk about the tool that you're developing, that you're updating and maintaining right now on Waste Dive?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, and I'm sure anyone who follows this space is well aware, China has really changed the game for recycling since last summer. They're banning the import of mixed paper, mixed plastics, and then have a very stringent contamination standard for anything else they'll accept. And so this is really set everyone scrambling for the most part, and we've seen a lot of scattered effects throughout the country. Various small cities changing their programs, different people raising prices, et cetera. And so back last fall, we wanted to just get a handle on tracking this as reporters. It was challenging for us to keep up with all the news that was happening. It seemed to be coming very quickly, in October. And so we decided, okay, let's contact all 50 states and get a sense of what their rules are. Some states require waivers to dispose recyclable material. The majority don't. And so that was just helpful for us, and we thought it would be for readers as well. We launched that tool in November. And it's still up online. You can see all 50 states, what effects are being reported from there, what the regulations are. And it was an experiment. We really didn't know how long this would last. I thought maybe through the end of the year, but it's remained more relevant and really picked up interest in the last few months, I would say, as the effects really set in from more and more of these local cities and counties. And so we update it every Friday. And and this week it'll be Thursday because we're not publishing on Friday because the markets are closed. But you can expect that, and we highly welcome tips and feedback. A lot of this is based off what we read in local media and various sources we have, but it's hard to keep up on all 50 states. So happy to hear from people, and a good way to meet new folks as well.
Right. And so what kind of updates have you been seeing?
Sure. So a lot of the activity right now is coming out of the Pacific Northwest, states such as Oregon, which does have a disposal ban in place. And so you do need state permission to dispose of recyclable material. A lot of the MRFs are having trouble there. A lot of, so far, only small municipalities are cutting back. Portland has not, for example, but 3 through 7 plastics are getting dropped from some programs. Rates are being raised. There's a lot of focus on education to reduce contamination because right now, people are participating in single stream recycling, but maybe not doing it accurately. And that's what's causing the problems for these recycling facilities. We're seeing this in the Southwest as well. New Mexico has been dealing with this quite a bit. And also here in the Northeast, where I live, Massachusetts has been particularly hit hard by this for a variety of factors. We're not the only ones. And another factor is, too, that we also have disposal ban in place. And so people do have to report to the state what's happening. It's not the case with some of our neighbors. But and Idaho and really scattered throughout almost every single state we've heard something from at this point.
Right, great. And when you're covering so much, news and updates about what's going on, and these problems do seem to be, really large, something not in your control. So, what kind of role do you see playing in all of this, and how do you cope with the scale of these problems?
Not always well. I'll tell you that it's hard. It is hard to keep up. We're a small team, and in general, there's just not a ton of coverage of this industry. We certainly do have competitors and they do good work, but there's just not a lot of reporters covering this topic. A lot of times, because waste is such a local issue, it's a lot of local reporters that really sort of get at this first. And I don't fault them at all. They don't do this full time. They're covering housing and crime and education, all these other things. So we'll see a little article maybe from X town's paper and go, oh, we know what that's about. That's part of a bigger trend. So we rely on a lot of that. And, our model is to try to distill down the story to make it readable for folks who may be busy in a executive position or a government position. And, we're free and open to everybody, so we welcome all to read it. But that's really the goal, is to try to get it all together, bring the relevant links and documents, and try to cut through some of the noise a little bit and figure out what's actually happening. We view ourselves as generalists. Basically, we only write maybe at most 4 or 5 stories a day, and that sometimes fewer. And so we can't get it all, but we try to keep our pulse on the basic trends that are happening.
Right. And this is a question that I've asked everyone on the series, so I should ask you. What's the end point for you in this journey, that you're taking? What do you hope to achieve by the end of it, or, what's the end of it?
Sure. It's a great question. I don't know exactly where it ends. I hope to be covering waste for the foreseeable future. Whether that's full-time or not could change. I do miss local reporting sometimes, and we have a need for that in the Boston area that is not always being filled. So who knows? Could do split a little bit of both. But there's a lot of larger stories that I still have in me that I'd like to get out there. A couple book ideas. Everyone likes to say that if you're a writer, so you always think that's a possibility. But yeah, how many?
Yeah.
At least a couple, I would say. Yeah. Just on waste. And there's other topics as well. But yeah, no, I'll be at this for the foreseeable future. We're really built up a lot of steam with Waste Dive. We're still a lot smaller than some of our competitors, still a newer name in the field. So still gaining notoriety and credibility, but we've come a long way, in the time I've been around. And so I want to see that through, keep pushing. And I think there's a lot more stories to be told, a lot more transparency that the industry could be given, and more out there. So yeah, I'm certainly not done.
For some of our, pioneers on the series, they've been working or they've been doing the kind of work that they're doing because they just want to roll up their sleeves and get to work, solve the problem. Some of them have been doing because they want to be part of a larger movement of people, and do something together collectively. And some of them been doing because it keeps them happy to help others. So what is it in this work that keeps you going?
Yeah, a little bit of all of it, I would say. And we're in a slightly different position as a reporter. We always strive to be objective parties in this, and so we don't have a particular end goal in mind for a policy, but really just improving the level of dialogue around this issue, raising awareness. We are focused on, our readers mainly come from the industry, but it would be great to educate the public more. There's clearly a need for that, as we've seen since this China disruption has happened. A lot of people really have no idea what's happening with their material. And even me as an average citizen around here, if I wasn't in this field, I wouldn't know where my recycling was going or where my waste was going. And now that I start asking our local city officials, they don't always like that. But I think people need to know the right questions to ask and have a reliable source of information. It's very easy for the industry or for local governments to kind of drive the conversation, and there's certainly more to it than one source will ever give you. So we just want to kind of improve the dialogue out there a little bit.
So it's improving transparency.
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. And are there any final thoughts? We have 3 minutes that you would like to add, something that we've missed from the discussion. Do you want to talk about anything else?
Not necessarily. Just thanks again for the invitation. I would say anyone who's listening, I think some of you I know, some don't. Always happy to meet new folks. Whether we focus on the U.S., but obviously scrap is quite an international world these days, and so it would be great to hear what people are doing in other countries, other parts of the world, and what kind of stories you want to see. We always respond very quickly to our readers, whether by email, social media. Always happy to get on the phone. If we're ever in the same city, for a conference or whatnot, great to meet up and get coffee. Always looking to expand the network.
Great. In that case, then, since we have another 2 minutes, do you want to talk about glass recycling?
Sure. So yeah, just real briefly, it's been an issue for a while nationally that folks are aware of. We've seen it happen in certain cities that have dropped glass from their curbside programs. And we'd covered it. I hadn't fully delved into it, but now it's in my backyard here in Massachusetts. A major glass bottling plant has closed down, and really sent everyone kind of scrambling a little bit. They didn't see this one coming, and that was a key end market for a lot of big programs, especially in the Boston metro area where I live. And so currently our glass is not being recycled. I'm kind of hoarding mine to use the jars and try to go to the container deposit programs for as long as I can. And it's been interesting to see what are the alternatives. Maybe we can use this as construction aggregate in road building, or as insulation, or there's ways to use it from the single stream, cart that just haven't been exploited quite yet. And so it's an issue far beyond Massachusetts. Glass is quite heavy, hard to transport. But at the same time, it's infinitely recyclable. I mean, it's sand, and so it's frustrating for a lot of folks to see it not get recycled, but understandable from a mechanical standpoint. You put glass into the single stream, you're contaminating your plastic, your cardboard, and the quality that you're getting out the back end is not always great either. So looking at how that evolves is going to be quite interesting and very relevant in New England for at least the next few months.
Right, and glass in the organics, kind of when it breaks down, and it causes safety problems for people working with glass.
Yes, definitely.
Great. So great material. I mean, I love glass. I kind of turned everything in my home from plastic to glass, or
nice.
Never bought plastic in the first place. So great material, but it's really disheartening to hear about the recycling aspect of it. I heard a similar story even at the conference yesterday. About the recycling of glass. So yeah, okay, all right, great, wonderful. With that, thank you very much, Cole. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rajiv.
All right, great.